In this lesson, we're going to look at the drums for Next to Me. It's important to say right from the off that this was a very hard task to do. I've spent quite a bit of time sculpting these sounds to make sure that they are almost identical, and I'm still quite a way off. But I've decided to stop where I'm at in favour of trying to get some more of the other parts done, and then I will come back and do a bit more resculpting. They're not in a bad place, and I've looked at where each of the sounds is panned, and I've looked at their position in the mix. So how did I start this task? The initial thing I like to do is get all of the drums recorded in or played in or just typed in. My initial setting to this was just literally for me to just type it in. We've got the score on the first page, so feel free to follow that. And I've just literally typed it in from that. And I do find it's easier to put it on one track first. Once I've done this, I then separate the same track out, as you can see, and if I just minimize this a little bit, as you can see, I've got 5 of the same parts here. And all I've done for each one is I've just taken out all the extra parts. So for the bass drum track, now this is only the bass drum. For the snare, now this is only the snare, and so on. So initially I've got all the parts working together to make sure it's all right. And once I'm happy that they are pretty much as they should be, I then move on and put them into their own individual parts, and I'll break that down for you in a second. But first, just so you know the way that the MIDI drum layout happens, it's like this. So looking around the C1 section, let me just turn this back to my arrow tool just in case I press something. Looking around the C1 section, you're going to find your bass drum, okay? And then this D1, you've got your snare, okay? This F1, you're going to have some kind of low tom. Okay, now for this next one, I've got this hi-hat, but actually when it came to it, I've actually got rid of the hi-hat in favour of a tambourine. I may change my mind later on, but at the moment that's how I'm hearing it. I'm hearing that the hi-hat pattern is a tambourine, so I've actually replaced this for a tambourine, but you'll have to make your own decision on that and make sure that you are happy that that's the case. So there's my tambourine, but like I said again, I've actually got rid of that for now. The next one up is my mid-tom. Now I've got 2 mid-toms here, and this was quite nice to do, separate them out into 2 parts. The reason I've done this is because this little fill part was easier just to quickly paste in if I put it on its different track, and then the bulk of the mid-tom sound is almost identical all the way through, so that's why I've kind of changed them onto 2 parts. You can have them on one part, it's completely up to you. Now, how I'm hearing the accent for the toms is really interesting. It can seem like it's going from low tom to high tom to low tom to high tom, and that's certainly how it's written in the score, but that's not how I'm hearing it. I'm hearing that this first beat, the accent, is actually playing the mid tom and the low tom together to give this really powerful beat, and then this next one, I'm hearing it just playing a softer hit on the mid tom. So it goes loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet. And that's giving me that real big drive to it, okay? The next thing I've done, and if you play this in, you're going to be a massive advantage to me, but the next thing I've done is I've used Humanize. Now, Humanize is a fantastic tool if you just want to get a good starting point for how these sounds should be. You might not get good results for the Humanize on this mid-tom because they do vary and they should vary in a certain way, and that's from loud to quiet. So you might have to put this data in yourself using the velocity tool, and that's certainly what I've done. But if you were to select all of the instruments just by pressing Command A, oops, I didn't want to do that. Okay, if Command A doesn't work for you, and apparently it's not working for me, just select them all. Okay, make sure you got them all selected, and then when you go to functions, you can come down to MIDI transforms, and you can use this Humanize button. Now I'll show you what it looks like, and this was the preset, and actually I've not changed this randomization from this plus 10 to almost 0. Okay, so I've kept this almost identical, and I've just pressed this select and operate. I'm not going to press it now because it will change all my parts, and I'm fairly happy with it. But that's a nice starting point to getting your not only your velocities randomized, but also getting a nice bit of swing to the actual part, so it's not completely on the grid. And if I zoom in, you will see that the Humanize has actually moved the parts around for me so that they're not on the grid. And it's only a tiny amount, it's like a 64, even maybe even less than that. But you can see that it's made them less rigid, less mechanical. Okay, and it's made it more rigid and more of a swing to it. So you get that human aspect. And this was a real drummer playing this track. So it's going to be really important that you make sure that you have that humanized aspect. And once again, if you're playing this in, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, any of that kind of cheating stuff, because it will just work for you. So the next part that I've done is I've actually muted this, okay, because I actually don't want it. This was my demo track, and eventually I'll just put it with the rest of my hidden tracks so it's out of reach and I don't see it again. But for now, I'm just going to leave it there just in case I need to kind of change anything and pop it back in. Now let's look at the bass drum. So as you can see, I've copied this, or sorry, I actually used a duplicate button, so duplicate it 5 times, and then copy this, Alt-click onto each of these tracks to make sure I've got 5 identicals. And once I've done that, I've just gone through and I've selected them. A good way of selecting them, or if you can't press Command A, is to zoom right in, and then anything you don't want, so any of these higher notes you don't want, select them by loop and press delete. So nice and easy. So as you can see on this one, all I've got is my bass drum. Now let me show you how this is set up. And I've used something new in Logic X. So if you're using Logic 9, you won't have this, but you do have good drum kits in Ultrabeat and things like that anyway. So I'll let you find your own kind of presets. And it's kind of a standard drum kit anyway. Some kind of rock or live session drum kit will suffice for this one. Okay, so if I come into my drum kit, we get this new panel in Logic Pro, and this is my bass drum. Okay, now once you hit on something like this, it gives you a couple of options. Firstly, you can change, and I'm not going to click any of these because it will change my sound. I don't want that. But you can click on any of these and you can actually change the kind of drum kit that you've got, which is fantastic. Next thing, you can change the tuning, and I wanted this slightly deeper, so I've moved it down by -200 cents, which is 2 semitones, okay? So 100 cents to every semitone. I've also reduced the dampness, so it's allowed to kind of echo out as it is. And I've also increased the gain by 2 decibels. And that's given me this nice fat sound, okay? And the same goes for all of these. When you click on the next track, the snare track, and then you come into the drummer, and if you click down here, you'll see in the new setup for Logic X, the drum designer is here, and it's a brilliant tool and I love it. But if you haven't got that and you're working in Logic 9, just come down a bit further and you can start with your Ultra beats and you will find some kind of rock beat in there. So where was I? Here we go. So we're going to double click on this again, and now we're going to look at my snare. And there's not much snare. The snare just basically happens in the fill section. That's pretty much all the snare does. And I will give you the screenshots in the lesson for you guys to kind of type this in if you don't like using the score. The score's fine though. Okay, so there's the snare that I'm using. I've added some extra damp. Now this is making it slightly more dry, so there's not so much echo on it. It's not so much. It's giving it a bit more slap actually, which is quite nice. And once again, I brought it up by 2 decibels of gain. We'll just have a look at the toms as well while we're here. So double click, go to my toms, and this time it gives me all the toms in one go. So I've got my low tom, which is up 200 cents. I think that's actually changed it again. That was meant to be down 100 cents, so I might have to change that in a minute. No, apparently I changed that back. Okay, that's fine. It does sound okay, so I'll play that for you in a minute. We're not using a high tom, so I don't need to worry about that. I will give you the screenshots for these settings as well, so you can have a look through that. So we've got a mid tom, a low tom, and then finally the crash. And I have separated out the crash here because it needs to be quite prominent as well. So let's have a look at the crash symbol. Okay, and it's allowed to ring out a little bit, so we've reduced the dampness, so letting it ring out a little bit more. We've pushed the gain up a little bit, and that's pretty much all we've done there. So a fairly simple tool to use, but very, very, very effective. So that's how I've set up the drum kit, just using the one kit. And I wonder if that's a standard kit. No, it was the default kit, so I've actually created this drum kit myself and manipulated it, but it was from the standard kit. There's no presets being used there. Okay, going back to the bass drum, what's some of the processings? Now, I've done two things here. Some of you are probably noticing that over in my channel mix, you're noticing that there is a drum mix. So as well as my bass drum, there's also this aux channel, which is a drum mix. This is routed to my output. So rather than this saying stereo out and going straight to the output, it's now being routed through this channel here and then going to my speakers, okay? And this is really important. It's called parallel processing. I mean, it allows me to add some extra stuff to the whole kit. Now, if you look at this, there's the bass drum. If you look at the snare, that's also got it on. If you look at the mid tom, that's also got it on. The low tom's also got it on. The crash has still got it. And most importantly, the hand clap and the tambourine have also got it on. Okay, I won't apply that to anything else, but in order to get the consistency that I wanted from my mix, I've had to channel it through an aux channel by literally, and if you go to this drum channel here, you see what it should look like. This is what it should look like. It should say stereo out here. But if you click on this button here, click and hold, and then go down to bus, you can actually create any of these. And I've put mine on bus 4, and just create a new one from there. Once you click on bus 4, then it will pop up here. Okay, and it will tell you, okay, so bus 4, this is bus 4 here, look. So it's channeling here, and then it's going outwards there. So if you're not familiar with busing, there is a nice, in the mixing tutorials section of musictechstudent.co.uk, there is a really nice tutorial that explains how to use busing. So go over and have a look at that, and hopefully that will clear up some of those issues. So it's important to say that we are parallel processing some of this stuff. So all of my drum tracks, including my hand clap and my tambourine, have been pushed through this extra thing, and this is going to make it more consistent. And as you can see, I'm using a compressor, a stereo imager, some extra EQ, which is this, and then finally a limiter, because the drum kit in the mix is quite loud, okay? So in order so that my mix doesn't bottle out and I can get enough headroom, I've had to use a limiter to kind of control that and really push everything out, okay? And now in each track, I've also used a limiter. I wasn't finding that I was getting enough punch from a compressor, and the limiter was just allowing me to push it a little bit further and have a cut-off point where it just hit the threshold and just cut out, give me that massive impact that I wanted. Okay, so I've pretty much done that across all the tracks. It's a bit of a tacky way of working, and some of you might be looking at it going, oh no, I don't like that, and that's fine. It is a bit of a tacky way of working. There are other solutions, but this is how I've done it, okay? So looking at my bass drum, we've got a bit of EQ, and I will share these settings with you, and I've dropped the 100k, and that's going to give me a little bit more punch and a little less boom, okay? And I've boosted it around here. Now normally I would cut it around here to a bit more clarity, but it's quite a full mix. There's no real clarity to these sounds. They're quite muddy. They deserve a lot of reverb, and they deserve a lot of mud, and that's why I had so much trouble with actually creating this particular one. And once again, I'll share these screenshots with you, but just working through into my snare now, and same thing again, I've used a limiter, and literally all I've done with the limiter is I've left it at 0 dB, but I've pushed the gain sound, okay? So once again, all of these channels have got a little bit of EQ applied to them and limiter, so we have had to sculpt the EQs in various ways to make them kind of gel together, okay? So let's just have a look at these. So same drill again, just limiter and EQ for pretty much all of them. And for the crash, I've used a spreader. The reason for this is it starts off in the left speaker, but it finishes just slightly over. And I found the spreader just gave me a bit of, it's called a stereo imager really, but it's given me just a little bit of width on the actual sound. So that's why I've put this on, and it makes the sound start in the left speaker as it should, but it just kind of sounds like it's going over to the right speaker just that little bit more, and that's why I put that on there. We've already done the hand clap. Well, one thing I should say is I've changed the tambourine EQ since we last looked at it, so I've now applied this high filter to get rid of all these low frequencies, and I've also increased some of these high frequencies to make it kind of a bit more, hissy and a bit more trebly, I suppose. And that was really listening to the track has kind of come to that, how it should sound. I think that's pretty much all I have to say, apart from there's a lot of reverb on here. So looking at my reverb settings, so if we remember, aux 6 or bus 6 is my main reverb, and all of these channels have quite a bit of reverb applied to them, and I've really done that to increase the muddiness of the sound. Right, let's listen to what I've got with what should be the sound. So here is the song. Okay.
You won't find I'm drinking on the table, rolling down.
Okay, and here is my one. So as you can hear, it's sounding okay, it's starting to work. There is a lot of work to do there, and you guys do need to be patient, and it will take a bit of sculpting to get this right. The final thing I want to say is about the panning. So if we look at the panning for the bass drum, it's center. If we look at the panning for the snare, it's slightly off to the left. Same with the tom, and same with the other tom, slightly off to the left, and then same with the crash. The mix does tend to be more left-sided, but in order to balance the mix further, that is why I've used this stereo spreader when I've passed it for aux 4 into the main output. I've used a stereo spreader just to kind of give me a bit more width on the actual sound itself, okay? Otherwise it was sounding a bit left-hand sided, and the reason it's coming off to the left more than anything else is because it's kind of got this interplay with the piano in a moment. So when we add the piano in the next lesson, you'll see that there's a little bit of interplay there between the drums and the piano, and that's why it's kind of sculpted that way. Remember, this is what I'm hearing, so if you're hearing it slightly different, you do need to go with your own opinions, but that's as I'm hearing it at the moment. We've applied a bit of compression on here, so here are the settings for this main bus for the mix, okay? So very light compression, 2:1 compression, -23 threshold, and 3 decibels of push, okay? So just to push that up a little bit. Okay, and it is, as you can see, it's flattening out the mix a little bit there, and adding the compressor at this point in the mix means that it will gradually bring the volume down before it hits the more harder processing of the limiter, and hopefully that's doing something this time. There you go. So without the compressor, you would see that's quite a bit heavier, or not. Okay. And then finally, because this track is for all of the drum channels, I've actually applied some broad EQ, and this is giving it a bit more shine, and you can hear from the actual track that it's quite bright. Although it's quite muddy, it's quite a bright drum sound. So that's my drum set.
Drinking on the table, rolling dice.
And there's mine without the EQ. With the EQ, just flattens the sound out a little bit, and there you have it. So once again, I will share all these screenshots in the lesson. Lots of work to do. Be patient with it. It did take me the best part of probably 5 hours to kind of sculpt this right. So, you know, be patient with it. Oh, and finally, so I've just noticed I did add more reverb. So to get that really bulky, muddy sound, I have added more reverb here, and that's just the main reverb again. And that's it for me. So give it your best shot, and I'll see you in the next lesson when we talk about the piano.